Great, many thanks, and good morning to everyone. So we're on a slightly tight schedule today, so appreciate you taking your seats. One of our panel has to depart to the airport. I'll leave you guys to figure out which one of them it is. So welcome to this panel. We're going to talk about the state of the sustainable bond markets. So we have a group of market participants here. I think the current state of the market very much reflects the experiences and the expectations of the participants in the market. So joining us today, we have Nicoletta Bertolini, who's head of funding at Intesa Sanpaolo. We have Bram, who many of you will be familiar with from his role previously at Enel, now at Goldman Sachs Asset Management. We have Craig from Fitch Ratings, Mohsin, who is at Islamic Development Bank, and Leo from Enel also will not be a stranger to many of you here in the room. So welcome to everybody. And maybe just to start with our issuer market participants, just to understand a little bit of your experience. Nicoletta, maybe we could start with yourself. You know, you guys are pretty experienced on this. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your experience to date and how you feel the label bonds have kind of served you as a company, as an issuer, you know, the kind of the dynamics that you've experienced and how you've sort of evolved your perspectives on the market, particularly in terms of sort of the benefits that you perceive, you know, as an example, investor diversification, you know, coherence with the sort of strategic orientation of the company. But to get us started, maybe you can talk a little bit about your experience and we can take it from there. So thank you.
Thank you, Paul, and good morning to all of you. So Intesa Sanpaolo has been active in the sustainable market for several years now, having issued our first green bond back in 2017. And since then, we issued 13 bonds, being them green and social. So from our perspective, we saw the market evolving significantly since then. And how? Well, we saw the market, this segment, being a niche one for quite some time, while now has become a core component of the funding strategies of many issuers. And through the years, we have seen also evolving the benefits that can derive in using the sustainable labels. How? Well, for example, you have specialized investors playing within your books, which means that you can rely on someone that really believes in the story of the instrument, in the story and in the business strategy of the issuer, and provides you with a core segment and a core demand for building up your transaction from there. So definitely having the label attached to your transaction gives you more depth, more investor diversification, and back in the days, you could argue that there was also a greenium attached. So you could save some basis points. Difficult now to detach this component when the market is extremely compelling. But it's true that over the past couple of years, we are in a issuer market. And therefore, it's not necessarily related to the use or not the use of the sustainable label, but more to the market conditions. And therefore, again, it's difficult to say now that there is a saving using the label, but definitely having more investors, having buy and hold investors, because the specialized investors are those that wants to keep the bonds, helps you in creating the momentum during the execution, and you can argue that that helps also to have traction when it comes to price the transaction. So multiple benefits. They are increasing over the time, and as issuers, we love to use the label when we approach the market, as we did, in fact, last week with a green senior non-preferred.
Great, many thanks. And Mohsin, maybe the same question to you, if you can talk a little about your perspective as an issuer in this market, and maybe particularly focus on, you know, how it reflects your sort of key stakeholder ambitions and your experience to date. Many thanks.
Thank you, Paul. We are from the Islamic Development Bank, which has 57 member countries on 4 continents. So it's a wide array of shareholders with very varying needs of development financing, both on the social side as well as green side. If I can have a sense check of how many in the audience are aware of Sukuk as a capital market instrument. Any hands? There you go. So I have my work cut out. We have what is the Islamic format of bonds, and by default, we have positive screening already in those structures, and we have been issuing since 2002. And so those positive screens have helped us mobilize resources to the tune of almost $60 billion with a 20-year track record. And once the SDGs were articulated and published by the United Nations, it was more streamlined into the project cycle of ISDB, and then that helped us create our sustainable finance framework, which was aligned with the ECMA principles, and drive more resources focused on green and social project categories. So the experience was very enriching, opening up those new doors in new jurisdictions where countries in Europe, for example, we used to have a lot of challenges explaining the Sukuk instrument itself. But when we aligned and published our sustainable finance framework with the ECMA principles, it opened those doors that were not previously opening. And so they saw the positive impact on the ground, making that ISDB is making through its projects in those member countries. And then stronger recognition was another benefit from regulators and central banks, especially EU member countries that never looked at it as a sustainable finance instrument, so to speak, were now very interested with the confirmation of the use of proceeds of the green sukuk or the sustainability sukuk that we issued, that these are going towards specific earmarked project categories. So opening those doors has helped us enhance the dialogue on the overall Islamic finance principles as well, the more ethical and responsible principles. And it has brought into the fold more and more central banks from the EU member countries, Asia, China and Japan never looked at it before as well. There's a lot of talk about panda bonds and samurai bonds, but there's no samurai sukuk or panda sukuk for that matter. So the dialogue has increased with the frequency, and we were just two months ago, we were in Hong Kong with the central bank HKMA, and we did a seminar on sukuk, again, raising that awareness with the capital market practitioners to show that there is full alignment, and then there you are getting this development impact through the instruments that we are issuing in those jurisdictions. So it has helped open those doors, enhance the dialogue, and also enhance the reputation of ISDB as a development finance institution from the South, within the South, and for the South in the world.
Thank you very much. And now turning to Enel, another of the Italian legends in the market. I guess it's almost sort of like a trilogy, Lord of the Rings sort of trilogy for you guys, starting off with the green bonds and then moving into sustainability linked, and then obviously having kind of closed the trilogy, the last chapter, going back to conventional issuance. You've used every tool in the toolbox. You've arguably, used all those tools to kind of complete your transition journey. Maybe you can tell us about that, because I think it's a fascinating story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Paul, and good morning, everyone. I think it's, of course, a tricky question. The answer could be something more in the region of, yes, probably we have used all the tools that we have in the toolbox, but I think that the main important question is, do really these sustainable instruments that we have used along those years have helped us achieve the trajectory, the sustainability that we have in mind at the beginning of the journey? The answer is yes, absolutely yes. Just to give you 3 numbers without annoying you, we started more or less in 2015, where we have basically around 40% of renewable store capacity. Now, today, we are at more than 70%. We have cut Scope 1 emission by more than 70%, and 83% of our fleet is GHG-free of emissions. This has been achieved thanks to the use of green bonds at the beginning, starting from 2017, where we issued around 3.5 billion of green bonds. And then, thanks to the use of sustainability-linked bond that we have, we were probably the big issuers in this field, issuing more than 34 billion. What was important for us was to understand that the business and the strategy should go hand in hand with the finance aspect, and therefore we totally linked the financial aspect with our strategy and with our business. Indeed, in 2015, where we were at the beginning of the transition, we started to use green bond because we have only probably a few selected green projects to fund, and that was the perfect instrument at that point in time, at the beginning of the transition. Then we realized that we were in a better position in terms of sustainable investment. We are starting seeing our capex growing in the field of sustainability, and that came the strategy to start using SLB, linking KPIs to the whole transition and to the whole strategy of the company. And this gave an incredible boost, I think, to the investment and to the transition. Finally, where we sit here, and with those numbers that I just mentioned before, we can say that basically our strategy and our transition is well underway. We are very close to the target of zero emission that we set for 2040, probably well ahead in time of achieving that KPI. And therefore, we decided that probably also investors considers us as fully sustainable, going to evaluate the ESG profile and the sustainability profile of the issuer more than probably the label, because our business, our investments are 100% sustainable, and therefore we decided that now we are comfortable with issuing, call it a conventional or unlabeled bond, probably.
Great, many thanks. And now turning to the sort of investor perspective, and we're fortunate to have Bram here with us, who's been involved in this market since the very early days. So I just wanted, Bram, if we could pick up on the sort of the asset owner perspective. You know, I personally think asset owners are one of the most powerful actors in this whole arena, but the challenge, of course, is to sort of channel that asset owner preference and in a way that allows investment managers to still do what they need to do. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how the asset owner client expectations have evolved over time, and you know, where there are distinctions in the kind of perspective of asset owner clients. You know, maybe you could comment a little bit on those as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and really happy to be here in Milan. I will, jump into your question straight away. So I think, we've seen quite significant changes over the last, 10 years or so. So we launched our first green bond strategy at GSAM in 2016. At that moment, investors who were investing in green bonds were investing across the board. So they were using green bonds as an aggregate investment vehicle, probably more as an impact vehicle. With the growth of the market, we've seen much more sophistication. So, for example, we are seeing on our side clients and asset owners investing in corporate green bonds only, sometimes in sovereign green bonds only, SSA. So there's much more sophistication which we've seen over the last couple of years. Yeah, simply because the market has been growing quite significant. So I think that's really something very positive what we've seen over the last couple of years. So where are we today? So I think that we are in a challenging environment, without any doubt. Everybody who wanted to, all asset owners who wanted to invest in green bonds or GSS label bonds from a sustainability perspective probably has already done so. So, and also referring a little bit to the speech earlier, so also from an asset management or asset owner perspective, the easy allocations already have been done. So there, where does that leave us today? I think what we are really focusing on at the moment, and I think this is something which probably a lot of asset managers are focusing on more and more, is, okay, the sustainability aspect, we know it does something good. But what about the more traditional risk-return characteristics? How does that look like? And what is the added value of adding labeled bonds in your portfolio? I think there are a lot of them, and I think we are not emphasizing them enough yet. Very often we're starting again with a sustainability narrative, which of course is good, it's important, but I think we really have to start emphasizing much more the risk-return profile, the added value of labeled bonds. And you know, one thing which we also have been discovering, and we wrote a thought leadership piece on that, is if you look at the fixed income market as a whole, it's actually too concentrated. I mean, look at a global aggregate index. I think the majority of that index is US Treasuries and Japanese government bonds. You probably don't want that, right? So adding labeled bonds, green bonds, gives you more diversification in your overall portfolio. And I think it's just an example, but it's really the added value of what a labeled bond, a dedicated labeled bond portfolio can bring to a broader investment portfolio.
Great, many thanks. And turning to Craig, first of all, congratulations on getting on the EU Green Bond accredited SPO provider reviewer list. And secondly, congratulations on cycling from London to Paris. So two things to congratulate Craig on. Turning to your day job, maybe you can give us a little bit of a sense of what you're seeing from the SPO perspective on the market in terms of current trends, and how you expect things to play out, particularly this breakdown between European green bond, the regulated market, and the green bond principles-based market. Maybe a few comments on how you're seeing the world. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. Cycling from London to Paris was a challenge. So was the registration with ESMA, so I'd put them both in the challenging category. So what are we seeing? I think, 12, 15 months ago, I think Nicholas said it this morning, maybe there was some, nervousness around the sort of magnitude, if you like, of the sort of ESG backlash in different geographies, regions, sectors. So at the start of sort of 2025 and the conference season or updates of principles, I think there's a big conference the Environmental Finance does, I could sense that there was that sort of question. I think if you fast forward 12, 15 months, I think a lot of that there's been a real sort of solidarity, if you like, from both, all actors in terms of the policymakers, investors, issuers, particularly in Europe, around sustainable finance. So the last 12, 15 months, I think, has been really, really strong for, I guess, minimizing the sort of backlash. And I actually personally think we've sort of reached peak ESG backlash, if that's the right way of saying it. Not that I ever doubt Moody's and their data, but I actually think that the first half of this year has been pretty strong. So our data is showing 10, 15% up in terms of sustainable finance, in particular in green bonds. So green bonds have been performing very well. In terms of topics asked and sort of inquiries that are made, we recently did a roundtable in Paris, which I think probably sums it up pretty well. Topic number 8 or 9 was SLBs. So as a conference or as an agenda item, and maybe today as well, SLBs have sort of fallen away a little bit in terms of the sort of visibility or the label itself. Topics that were heavily discussed, EU green bonds, maybe we'll come on to that later. Transition, the transition label. We started to get into a lot more around thematics, so blue finance, adaptation and resilience. We had an investor give sort of a bit of a fireside chat around the use of artificial intelligence in sustainable finance, which I found quite interesting. We've seen summarizing, I think the market's in a pretty good shape. And I always hear people talk about peak 2021. It depends which data you look at, but the data we look at, it's 10% globally down over 5 years in fixed income, including everything that North America has contributed or not. So I think that's fairly resilient, and I think we all know that there is areas to grow in terms of the topics today, hard to abate sectors, different labels. But it is a very sort of mature market that's reaching a different level of sort of sophistication. And in some aspects, maybe it's like the tourists have gone home, but kind of those that are committed are here to stay, and that's positive. So I see a pretty healthy market, and certainly the number of inquiries we get. I will just touch on one other thing, is the is Sustainalytics, not in a sort of, it was a start of January. I guess it was a bit of a shock to some people, which you could take different angles from in terms of their rationale for stopping second-party opinions and post-issuance reviews, etc. But it is something that the market has sort of recognized. Of course, there's enough providers left, but I think that we're entering a different phase, maybe. And I think Swami touched on a few aspects which I'll agree with later on. Thank you.
Great, many thanks. Nicoletta, maybe turning back to yourself, a couple of comments on whether or not your sense of how investor expectations are changing over time. Is there anything to say on that? I mean, ultimately, banks obviously have to respond to plenty of different kind of constituencies, but is there any sense that investor expectations of yourselves are changing over the time that you've been involved in the market? Thanks.
Sure. I think that the market has moved from a phase of creation and growth into a phase of scrutiny and diversification. I remember at the beginning, issuers, including Intesa Sanpaolo, we were focusing on the establishment of the framework. We were focusing on finding new issuers to come to the market and on the establishment of the green and the social label. So all the focus was there. And even from an investor perspective, they were looking at the instrument characteristics and they were also looking at the allocation of the proceeds. Now, all these aspects remain, but in addition to them, they are adding an in-depth analysis of how the instruments are fitting within our sustainability strategy and how this strategy is fitting within the business model of the group. So there is a 360 assessment of the issuer capability to use the instrument to really finance and give an outcome into the real economy. So the take home for me from this question is that the labels matter and will always do. But what matters the most is how credible, how transparent is an instrument and how you can prove that these instruments has a real impact in the economy.
Great, and Mohsin, same sort of topic, but obviously you have slightly different kind of shareholder considerations in a way. Is there any sense that the shareholders, i.e. the countries that effectively are the shareholders of the ISDB bank, have you sensed that their expectations are changing in any way, or is the mission kind of remaining fairly consistent, or are you feeling that kind of energy security and the current kind of geopolitical context is changing the way shareholders, view your activities in this market?
Yeah, I completely agree with Nicoletta. The scrutiny has increased in recent years, and I'll just highlight two initiatives and then what the impact has been from our stakeholders. So we were part of the G20 Sustainable Finance Working Group in the past 3 years, and we undertook a guidance on green, social, and sustainability sukuk with ECMA. When we published that guidance to break down the sukuk instrument and show the alignment with sustainable finance principles and the ECMA principles as well, we met a lot of investors at these meetings, both in Indonesia G20 and Brazil G20. We saw that they went with the guidance and they understood it, and then they came with very specific questions. For example, can you give me a label for women empowerment in the Arab region? So very predefined sort of, preference. And we went to our operations complex and we found out we had a good volume of projects that could be used to show the use of proceeds for women empowerment in those countries, for that matter. Another example is for Indonesia, which is a very large member country for us, third largest shareholder. A lot of coastal degradation is happening over there. And then there are flood-prone zones as well. So affordable housing in coastal degraded areas for the development of the societies or the population over there. So very specific target population and predefined outcomes from the investors. Queries were received, and we were able to show this because of the enhanced transparency and integration of the SDGs and their indicators in our financing policies, sector policies as well. So we had the positive screening, but then with the ICMA principles level of distilling those principles and eligible categories, we were able to cater to their preferences, and it just shows that there is a crop of investors that are fine with the overall overarching green or social label, but then there is specific requirements as well from some very sophisticated investors who are looking very deeply at these criteria. And at the end of the day, it helps us as well internally to polish our articulation of the results and outcomes of those projects that we are implementing in our project member countries. Sorry.
Great, many thanks. And on the same topic, Leo, I mean, I don't want to kind of labor the toolbox metaphor too much, but having put all the tools back, did investors ask, why have you put the tools back in the toolbox? We'd like to see them again. Can you comment on the sort of investor dialogue that emerged around the time that you were thinking of going back to doing conventional labeled issuance?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, of course, the decision to start, let's say, issuing an unlabeled bond didn't come out of the blue. Of course, we have a series of meeting roadshow with investors, with a frankly and open dialogue, explaining the reason of the potential choice. Then, of course, you have your brand that can confirm, hopefully, or not. But I think that the dialogue was always pretty open with investors. They perfectly, I think, understood where we were in terms of the journey. In the end, we can say that also the investors made this journey with us because they accompanied us starting back from 2017 at the time of the first green bond. So I think that they appreciated, first of all, the consistency of the strategy, the industrial strategy, I mean. They also appreciated, I think, the transparency, not only in terms of dialogue, but also in terms, I think, of reporting. Because if you, for example, take our full year report, there is a lot of disclosure, and many things are said in that document. And I think that the most important things that we took from those meetings during Investors Roadshow was the fact that they started assessing the sustainability issuer profile. That is what, at the end, we wanted to achieve. So this works, I think, quite perfectly as a tool, to verify this. We can see basically the demand and the order book that we achieved in the last two transactions, one in euro and one in dollars. The demand was there, so the deals went incredibly good. And the other things is the fact that even if we are not issuing anymore probably labeled instrument, we are still 100% committed toward sustainability. But because, as I said, we have, first of all, a zero target in terms of Scope 1 emissions that we need to achieve by 2040. And of course, because we have SLB still outstanding that need to be reported. So, of course, we will give investors and let's say all stakeholders all the information that are needed in order to comply with the achievement of the KPI.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
want to comment?
Yeah, maybe a short comment. To be honest, I was a little bit disappointed that Enel, stepped away from the label bond market. I'm managing quite significant label bond portfolios, and for me it means at the moment, I do not have any Enel bonds in my portfolio. I love to see them back in my portfolio. I think Enel always has been a leader in issuing green bonds very early, after that SLBs. So I would love to see at some stage Enel coming back to the label bond market. So I'm also wondering, is there any condition or is there any possibility you will, revisit that decision and you start issuing label bonds again? Would there be any possibility, or is it a no forever?
No, no forever. I would say probably no. But I mean, it's something that will closely follow the strategy of the business. So since we are right now in a path where we are going toward the 100% sustainability, probably is the commitment is there by definition when it comes to the strategy. So all the proceeds that we will raise in terms of, that could be the SLB basically, are for sure 100% invested in a green or sustainable project.
Great, many thanks. Now, I promised Bram we'd try to stick to time, and I just want to make sure that we make the most of Bram being here on the panel. Maybe you can comment briefly on your investment process evolution, Bram, over the years. We heard from Alban that they have a team of analysts. I don't know if it's similar for yourselves or if it's evolved over the years. Is there any talk of AI, for example, taking on some of the role that would traditionally be performed by analysts? Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the investment process on your side, when it comes to your label bond strategies, has evolved. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about. First, just want to reiterate a little bit what Craig just said on the market. I think the labeled bond market this year is probably exceeding expectations. The second quarter, in terms of green bond issuance, is the best quarter ever since inception of the green bond market. And I think that is an extremely positive signal. I think there has been some questions here and there about sustainability in general. I think a lot of those questions are really coming from the fact that some of the sustainability strategies, and in particular on the equity side, have not been doing very well. On the fixed income side, the fixed income market, fixed income funds, fixed income flows have been extremely resilient. And I think still, and this is what we said 5 years ago, but it's still valid for today, that if you have a fixed income allocation, the GSS instrument is such an easy instrument to include in your portfolio. It doesn't cost you anything. So I think, again, I'm extremely positive on how the market is developing at the moment. Just one thing which we really would like to see is more dollar issuance, US dollar issuance. I mean, there's a lot of global investors and a lot of exposure is in US dollars. So, any issuer, we always would like to encourage them to consider also issuing in US dollar, because that really helps us building global portfolios. And then very shortly on your question, actually, because I'm deviating a bit, but just on the investment process, I think on our side, over the last 10 years, we just have become much more sophisticated. So we have a very big research team, 5 in The Hague, 1 in Bangalore, 2 in Singapore, focusing on doing GSS analysis, impact reporting, engagement. It's really a very big part of GSAM's offering in the market. And I think it has become much more sophisticated. And for sure, AI in the future should play a role in making sure that you're able to, are able to consume all the different data points in the market. Yes.
Great, thanks. Okay, folks, you heard it here first. Anyone who can do dollars, see us afterwards. Please join me in thanking everybody for their contributions today and wishing everybody the best. Thank you.